Well, welcome to our weekend debate. And here we are on another beautiful sunny day, and we'll introduce our panel to you. A lot of thought goes into this every week. Starting with a person that we know from here. In fact, we'll come to Borat in a moment. Anyway, over to you, Mark.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Mark O'Connor. I'm a law student at Keele University, and I'm an avid follower of Isle of Man politics and current affairs.
And you do a bit of work with us.
And a bit of work with
still.
I'm Bernard Moffatt. I'm a nationalist of over 50 years, former trade union official of over 30, and the president of the Trades Council of 22. But now I'm just an old retired fella.
Doing some interesting stuff online all the time. We've
just a bit of comment.
Please, just mention what's it called? Your actual on Facebook?
It's the Celtic League Man on Facebook site. Yeah,
I get a lot of stick on that.
But I've hijacked it, so I'll probably get kicked out of the Celtic League next. Big news in 2021.
Ooh, you always say it as it is, and you take no prisoners, which I love. Because I get quite a lot of stick on it. You got called Borat, so that's the whole thing. You did an interview the other day.
Sasha.
You've never since had your big stash.
I went to the barbers very soon after that interview was broadcast.
Oh, you see, that's the effect you have, Bernard. Anyway, finally.
And I'm Daphne Caine. I'm one of the MHKs for Garff, have been for 4 years. I'm also a member of the Department for Enterprise responsible for digital.
Oh, okay. I'd like to start with the press conference, but you didn't see it this week. I should have told you about that.
I didn't see it this week, but I've seen the
You've heard
highlights,
about it.
and I get the script.
Okay. Anyone want to start on this? I mean, it was a vaccine special.
I thought it was pretty good, actually. I've watched most of the press conferences, or caught up on bits of them afterwards, but I watched this one as it was actually on, because, of course, the big news was the vaccine. And I thought it was pretty straightforward. It's a bit weird, the CEO woman coming beaming in from wherever she is in England, wearing a party dress. But I thought that Ashford was pretty clear and direct with what he was saying.
But he always is. He's good at these things.
And Hewitt was very good as well. I mean, when she said she was going to have the jab and a mum of over 90 was going to have it, I thought, lead me on. I'll have it as well, you know. But no, it was very good. And I think it's important that people were reassured about not just the vaccine, but the rollout method and everything surrounding it, because there's a lot of false information kicking around.
A lot of the information, a lot of the emails I'm getting are fear over, is the vaccine safe? So David Ashford explaining that all 3 sections of the trials have been observed, and that, you know, there's been no shortcuts in the testing of the vaccine. That was very important. And I should say, I did hear it on the radio. I didn't watch it. I didn't hear all the questions, but I did hear most of it on the radio.
There's aberrations with all vaccines, though. And there's no doubt at all that as these are rolled out, because there's different ones, there's going to be a sort of avalanche of scare stories around them. But I mean, people have got to focus on what's the big issue here. The big issue is that this is probably the biggest pandemic since the Spanish flu over 100 years ago. And, you know, the fact that they've been able to tackle it in the way that they have, globally, I mean, I think is pretty good. And I think how things have been handled here has been pretty good as well, you know. Not that I like to praise Howard too much, but
where it's due.
He's done pretty good. And
I mean, my question was...
you're always negative.
Yeah, he gets called out for
they were talking about now putting in place people to do the vaccines, right? You know, now. But my point was, surely you've had your tabletop working out all these things, and at some point a vaccine was coming along. So why not have all these people in place already?
Well, I think the CEO did respond to you there, that they had already sort of
but they're going done for
preliminary work on it, you know, to be fair. But I don't think people expected that the vaccine would be out before Christmas. It's come in a rush. Certainly, frightened the Russians, because they've rolled theirs out today, haven't they?
Yeah.
And that hasn't been properly tested, apparently.
Well, you've been in the United Kingdom for many months. We've done an interview about your COVID experiences. I mean, you're actually slightly still freaked out about being back here. Are you? No masks and no...
I thought you were in Azerbaijan.
I know. I was allowed into the country, but yeah, no. So it's been quite a bizarre experience. I went out last night into Douglas, and it's almost, I still got a bit of that anxiety, you know, going into like bars and pubs where there's just loads of people, and obviously the drink helps with that. But you know, it's quite interesting just seeing. I mean, this is such a bubble, and it is such a bubble, and it's quite easy for the bubble to burst. And I think we've seen this with it wasn't a community transmission, it was a local transmission and the clusters and all this. And, the 2 weeks isolation, I think people are following the rules. And, it's been widely spoken about, students getting a bit of a hard time with the wrap. My response is always, well, if you look at the people who've actually been arrested and charged and convicted, it's either key workers or people over the age of 50.
I think you're right there. One of the low points in all this was the concern surrounding the return of students. I think it was absolutely horrible and intolerable, and must have been for parents and the kids themselves, if I can put it that way.
Unfair, unjustified.
Yeah.
But it's hardcore. The ones that write to Howard and he has his thank you cards on his desk. These are the people who just want a lockdown, and we keep coming back to this. There's people who don't want any movement, and you got the others.
But there was no evidence at all that the students were going to arrive on the boat and head for Tesco's for a carry-out.
No, that'd be a key worker who did that.
Yeah. But there was a large group of people returning at one time, and that was the extra pressure in terms that we're being told that the lack of hospital beds availability and staffing, that's the crunch point with the risk of more people coming over and the percentage of them that may have it. But I agree, I think it's unjustified, unfair to say that students are any more likely to break the quarantine. I think that there's a very high level of compliance of all ages for that, and we see the value when we notice that Jersey has now 440 active cases.
Yeah,
you can't make that up, can you? I mean, you've got Guernsey and Jersey totally didn't pass, and they could have been on the right one. But of course, they went for the economic opening.
And we're talking about reopening the air bridge back to Guernsey.
Yeah.
So the Isle of Man is in. You might say it's in a bubble, but it's only protected by the compliance of people coming.
We've been incredibly lucky, haven't we? Because when you think of what's raged around us, I mean, I speak to my daughter in Northern Ireland and in the east of Ulster. I mean, it's got one of the highest rates in Europe, and then in the northwest of England and the north of England generally, it's so concentrated. I mean, we're not out of the woods yet, and there's probably a likelihood there will be another outbreak here, but at least things are moving in the right direction now.
Just on your point, just about what you're saying, Paul, about people either want them open or shut. I don't think it's that binary, and I think it's important that we allay people's fears, and people have got concerns about students or about a vaccine. But
I meant completely locked or some movement, not open or shut, because that's clearly not going to happen.
I think the key thing when we get is government messaging. And it's the messaging to people to make sure that they feel safe and that they feel comfortable and where they are. And I feel like, just briefly, I think the press conference earlier this week I thought was really good because, as we said from the start, it was the medics leading it. You had the chief exec, you had the director of public health actually on the podium, not just brought in for a question. I thought that came across really well, and I thought the messaging behind it really worked.
But are we really saying that Howard doesn't deliver very well? I mean, not as what his job, but delivery is not his strong point, Daphne. I mean, you know this.
I think he has grown into the role, and somebody under that amount of pressure and this unprecedented time of COVID, I think the Isle of Man has done well, and I hear a lot of praise for Howard Quayle and his administration's handling of it. So going back to what's important now is how we progress from this point, how we come out of this phase, how we start allowing more travel, and the outcome of not permitting level 3A with family allowed to visit for Christmas is that an increased number of people from the Isle of Man are likely to travel away. I know several who are to visit family, and then there'll be large numbers of them self-isolating when they come back. So they're allowed to travel.
You got a presentation last week. It was one of the questions that I might have got to in the thing about a 3A potential. Is that right? Were you there for that one? So Howard was leading from that,
he was
he?
leading, and he was
There's
asking
a potential
for
of
views.
a 3A,
He was asking for views before Christmas, and there were a number of us who felt that 3A could be a possibility because of the high level of compliance.
Before Christmas, so it would have happened, if it's going to happen, it would have happened on that Thursday, because otherwise it will be Christmas.
But in terms of the UK infection rate, there was not enough movement to give them the confidence that had come down enough to reduce the risk.
I think they're absolutely right to keep the controls as they are at the moment. That's the public mood, even amongst a lot of people who would like to have family come back here. I'd love to have had my daughter here and granddaughter for Christmas, but we're in the middle of a real crisis here. And the Isle of Man's been pretty lucky. Pretty lucky. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how they've handled it. Well, for a start, they are the health workers in the island that have dealt with it. So Howard and David Ashford are the front men, if you like. They're delivering the message. I didn't like a lot of the press briefings. I thought Howard's style was fairly wooden in some of them. But the briefing the other day, and we're talking about this week, this week's briefing was very good, it was. And I don't think it would have mattered whether Howard was there or not, or who was delivering the message. The message that came across was very clear. And I think it's a damn good point that was made that, you've got the techie people there. I think that's the term I used in the article I wrote on this. Henrietta Hewitt was able to answer the questions very clearly and very precisely that came from the media. Mind you, media questioning leaves a lot to be decided.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'm first next Thursday. I'm not very excited. First is the worst place because they don't tell us what's
so
going
you'll
to
be giving me the black spot next, like they are up on Douglas Head.
It would be helpful if you knew what was going to be said.
So do you think it's working as a media message? Because I agree. I think it was very strong. The message is the important thing. So the style of how it's been operated up to this point has got the message to the public very effectively.
The numbers are dropping, aren't they? We're watching it. You hit the button every time when you say that because you know my thoughts on this thing on Zoom is just horrible. And there's technical problems every single time.
I don't know why they don't have the journalists
well, that's the point. Yeah. The room can take it. Why we're not in the situation where we have to be self-isolated. It just drives me nuts. And I'm sorry when I have to
get too cosy because, to be perfectly honest, if these regular briefings, chats to the nation by selected politicians are allowed to go on into the new year, you're facing a democratic difficulty here. Next year is the election year. And you cannot give sitting members who haven't declared yet whether they're going to stand again for election, but very likely will. You can't give them voluminous airtime just because there happens to be a crisis around.
Well, they have got positions. I mean, these are ministers. These are not just members, backbenchers.
I think they're protected to be ministers to carry out the ministerial functions.
Yeah, well, I thought to get the message across, I thought we had, what's that place? It's up on Prospect Hill where they all gather. I thought that's where the message went across. And then there's a load of people sitting around there and they can ask questions. I think we need to get back to more of a democratic situation. I know I've used drawn parallels with North Korea and stuff like this. But
it looks like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, well,
especially in the early days, that one camera.
You can do that on Facebook, but to be perfectly honest, it is getting, certainly the senior tier of government, people like Howard, Alf and David and one or two more that can carry it off, they are starting to come across as a bit presidential in their style. I don't know what we see in jockeying for position in the Council of Ministers as well, although what's going to happen after the next election. But the point I'm making is the island says it's a democracy, and you cannot give certain folk who are going to be standing next time an unfair advantage against those who'll be standing against them. Because there's a lot of sitting members in there, probably Daphne, who's going to stand again.
Daphne?
I hope she is.
Well, I think that's a really true
She's the
point.
thinking person's politician.
Thank you.
What? Write that one down and keep that one. Yeah.
Yeah. No, on the debate, it's really interesting because members receive the information literally 2 minutes before it goes out to the Isle of Man, and then our inboxes are full of people responding to it even before it's finished. Yeah. And that's worrying. So I would say that yes, it's very helpful that we have the COVID briefing every few weeks now with Howard Quayle, and there's interaction there. But it would be more democratic for that to be delivered in the Tynwald setting as a statement and members able to ask questions.
Dead on.
Well,
I mean,
Nicola Sturgeon does that though quite a lot. Even though she's got her briefings, a lot of what she does is, I think when they announced the schools exam situation in Scotland, I think some of the bigger announcements she makes within the Scottish Parliament.
Nicola's always to the fore to talk about anything except what went on over Alex Salmond.
Your first name terms with Nicola. I love that. Anyway, it's an interesting point.
I think Alex used to be a member of the Celtic League years ago.
Yeah,
so
well, he's big friends with Alan Bell.
You never know who's in the league these days.
So where are we going on this? The fact is, like Guernsey is always driven by their clinicians, isn't it, when they do press conferences overall? We've had this debate in the past. Whereas here it's mostly, we have Howard and Ashford, and then we wheel on the medical experts in and out.
But that's because so far it's been a political judgment call. They hear all the evidence from the medical and economic experts. They have to make a judgment call about the right decision for the Isle of Man in the current circumstances. And it isn't only the health infection rate, the Isle of Man, it's the hospital admissions from other things that is the issue at the minute, not just COVID on the Isle of Man and the increased risk of people returning to the Isle of Man. One thing that was really surprising was that 600 or 700 people a week are travelling to the Isle of Man with permission. So, yep. So 600 or 700 people anyway, and then you have the students obviously increasing the numbers potentially through the December weeks. So what's going to happen in January? And do we think that when the students return, that going to a level 3A in January, depending on the infection rate in the UK, do we think that that would be palatable in terms of permitting close family to visit Isle of Man? And would there not be such a peak demand because it's January and not everybody could accommodate the 2 weeks quarantine?
People have to forget that the self-isolation, it's not prison. You know, I think people bizarrely confuse it sometimes. You're now allowed out for an hour walk or whatever, and these are Manx.
Well, that's controversial for a lot of people. They don't want that happening, don't they?
I saw somebody out with a mask on today walking, and I assume that's somebody on doing their self-isolation.
It's not prison, and we shouldn't treat people like, in my opinion, anyway.
They don't change the rules on that. So if you had to stay when you self-isolated for 2 weeks inside that cottage, not going out at all, would you feel differently about that?
Well, when I was in isolation, they then, I think it was on the Thursday, they announced this new rule about you can go out for an hour a day with the mask on for your exercise, which I took full advantage of.
That's what I mean. So you have it better, but otherwise, that was the whole reason for changing the rules.
I think that was an important change, and also a logical change. It's that in terms of containing the risk, that seems a good balance between mental health, need for exercise, and quarantine.
I mean, the island got to where it did by introducing social distancing and people taking care not to sort of interact too much. I think some of the rules around isolation are a bit rigid, to be perfectly honest, but at the present time, the government are having to balance two competing schools of thought. I mean, if you read some of the more zany social media like Manx forums or some of the more way out Facebook sites,
there's more way out than Manx forums.
You've got people saying, we should just come back to normal. It's just a cold, it's just the flu or whatever. Yeah. But at the other end of the scale, you've got people wanting to zip the place up totally. So you've got to strike a balance. What happens over this festive period, provided there's no outbreak of the virus here again, is a good dry run for the government to consider in the new year whether it does relax things. Because by then, with a bit of luck in the UK, the curve will be continuing to go down as it is at the moment.
I don't think
and
so.
The vaccine will be coming.
No, because I think the Christmas blip will then kick in because all the people will be getting together for Christmas.
You're always so negative. No wonder they don't like you at press conferences.
But in the Isle of Man, there's still you still have your first 2 weeks self-isolation. Yeah. So the Isle of Man, as long as there's a high level of compliance.
But to get to 3A, it requires the UK to hit certain targets, and I don't know if that's around the corner.
And the Isle of Man Hospital to be at a certain level of admissions and availability. And also we were told another surprising aspect to this that they've got to put into the mix is the number of patients receiving UK hospital treatment who would then need to return to the Isle of Man probably sooner than they would otherwise have been discharged and require hospital treatment under a self-isolation rule. And the possibility of those patients also contracting COVID. So there's a lot more than is apparent on the surface. And, hats off. I agree actually with Bernard here that this administration has got us to this point that we have been so lucky, and I've had other friends, students, children of colleagues who find it incredibly strange. They've been in lockdown since May in a lot of cases at UK university, and that strangeness of actually being able to hug somebody that you see on the street.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things that did cause a lot of angst here was the kind of draconian measures that were taken as well. And I had a lot of people getting in touch with me because one of my other hats years ago was civil liberties, you know, when there was a big civil libertarian campaign on the island. And people were naturally thinking that I would identify with opposition to the stance the government was taking, but I think it was the correct stance they took, because from talking to colleagues in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland, talking to family in the north of Ireland, the reason things went downhill over there was people weren't playing by the rules at all, and the rules weren't being enforced, and here they were enforced. And sometimes, you know, the medicine can be pretty strong, if you like, but you've got to take it.
Okay, but that brings us back to the end of this part.
Sorry, before we go there, there's one thing I meant to say. You know, we were talking about communication and the briefings and Tynwald and so on. I think that it's vitally important that the conduit for communication with constituents is through their MHKs, and they should be able to question in the keys, get the information there, and be given answers which are not as evasive as some of the answers that currently are produced at question time. It's almost as if question time has become an irritant for a lot of people in the Isle of Man, the punters out in the street, the ones who aren't 100% politically involved. Question time is important.
We can talk about that later. We can come back to this, no problem at all. But just coming back to finish this section with, would you or would you not take the vaccine straight away? I mean, no waiting around. If it was offered to you, you haven't got any other research on it?
I'm on the list, the over 50s, but at the bottom of the
I'm over 60s now. What are you, 70?
I'm 74.
Oh, you're one of the first.
75.
You're one of the first.
Do you know what I was thinking of doing? I was thinking of trying to get into a care home so I could get the first.
Get the first lot.
So you take it straight away without waiting.
I'd take it. I am reassured that it's completed all its stages.
I would take it because to be perfectly honest, I'm likely to suffer more with my blood pressure after this interview with you.
But COVID is worse than a vaccine. The long-term effects of COVID are proving to be worse potentially than the vaccine.
Yes. You had many tests in the UK. You were always in clusters or something that were being targeted. And you were told to report for tests.
I've had 4 COVID tests. I've done the isolation plenty of times.
Are they as bad as they seem?
This is the thing. I think, in my opinion, they're not that bad. It's a bit like, obviously it goes up your nostril and back of your throat, so it can be a bit uncomfortable, but I'm
reassured I shook hands with you now and didn't go like that.
But the other thing about the vaccine, they don't know yet whether that will allow free travel, because there's no knowledge how long it lasts, whether you are whether you don't contract the disease when you've had the vaccine, or whether you could still pass it on.
Exactly. So would you take it to finish with?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
You don't need to, right? Because you're right at the bottom of the pile.
You could take it.
If the vaccine was offered to me, I would take it, absolutely, yeah.
I suppose at one stage it will go down to everyone, won't it? Yeah, so that will bring university, because, you know, we've done this before, but university life has just been horrible for you, right?
It's draining, I think, is the one descriptor I would use. It's all online, pretty much, unless you're doing like nursing or medicine, something where you have to be in practical labs. But for someone like myself doing a humanities degree, you know, you wake up in the morning, obviously your desk's in your bedroom, so you stay in your room the whole day on your desk. You then have dinner and go to sleep and go for a walk, whatever. But that's it, and it's a real draining cycle. And there's been huge amounts of talk about mental health for students and lots of issues over this lockdown, and that's been the real. I think mental health issues as a result of COVID might even be worse than COVID, particularly in some ways.
Well, communications. A lot better now, aren't they? I mean, when my youngest daughter was at university, we used to speak to her on Skype virtually every night, so there's contact there. So
but technology, Bernard, technology.
Yeah?
Technology.
Yeah, I noticed you earlier on with your technology.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm not doing my live mixing today. It's all horribly gone wrong here. Anyway, we'll leave it there.
That's why I'm being so light-hearted about this. Because this probably isn't being recorded.
I hope not. End of part 1. Thank you. Do join us for more.
Please like and subscribe to the Isle of Man TV channel. Thank you.